This is Pittsburgh Today, with your hosts, John Wade and Patrice King Brown.
Hey, act surprised. Nice shirt. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pittsburgh Today. I'm glad you tuned in this afternoon. We've got a good show planned, I think.
That was almost like what you suggested a few weeks ago, that one day we have an hour of applause.
Yeah.
They were really going, getting in a certain rhythm like that. Speaking of rhythms, you've been to some rock concerts, have you not?
Well, actually, I haven't been to concerts in a long time, but probably when I was much younger. Yes, I did.
Yeah, see, I'm not allowed in rock concerts because I'm too old. But I hear that a lot of things go on there, and there's some people who think that actually rock music is not that helpful. And we're going to visit with Reverend Peters, who's from St. Paul, Minnesota, and he actually thinks that rock and roll has very much contributed to the decline of values in our youth. You know, all the drug culture, the promiscuity, and all that. Just
now,
the
is this rock and roll from really the early beginnings of rock and roll? Like
well, I think so. It started in the mid-'50s, I guess, with Bill Haley and the Comets and Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and everything. But he and his brothers, who are also ministers in St. Paul, they have sessions where they actually burn records, burn album covers and music and everything, and they're leading a crusade, and they feel very strongly. Also, Father Charlie Apple, who is an Episcopalian priest here, as you know, he's a DJ on one of the radio stations in New Kensington. Well, obviously, he doesn't share Reverend Peters' view, so I don't know what's going to happen.
We're going to have a discussion.
We'll probably have some symphonic music playing in the background as they talk.
Well, we're also going to be visiting with Lucille Tregonowan of Transmissions by Lucille. And Lucille comes in, and she's always got things that you think you should have been doing. I mean, you know, really commonsensical tips for taking care of your car. And there are a lot of things we can do now in preparation for that bad weather, which, believe it or not, is coming, even though the weather these days has been pretty nice.
And also, just what you've been waiting for, we're going to cook today.
We're going to make mulligatawny. What's that? You'll find out.
We'll find out, hopefully, and then you will. We're going to take a quick break and come back and meet Reverend Peters. Be right back. Well, of course, rock and roll in some form or another has been with us since the mid-'50s, I believe, when Chuck Berry was around and Bill Haley and the Comets and, of course, Elvis Presley. And then, of course, it evolved or developed or went uphill or downhill, depending upon your point of view. Today, Reverend Peters is with us today, and as I told you at the top of the show, he feels very strongly that rock and roll music has really contributed enormously to the decline of mores in our youth. And he's with us today. We're going to discuss that very fact. Let's give you a nice warm Pittsburgh welcome, Reverend Peters. Now, Reverend, first, since you're not from this area, maybe you could give us an idea of what type of ministry you have in St. Paul, if you're with the church or what you're doing.
I have 3 brothers, and we are all traveling, giving rock music seminars, but we are full-time pastors in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Okay, what denomination?
We're an interdenominational church and just preach the gospel. And a couple of years ago, John, we did a rock music seminar for our own church young people. We were really kind of taken back by some of the things we were hearing being sung about that we never had heard when we were growing up. So we did a rock music seminar in November of 1979. About 400 kids came. At the end of the seminar, we said, you go home, talk about it with your parents, but if there's anything you're finding that is offensive to you in the music you're listening to, now that you really understand what they're singing about, bring it back tomorrow and you can burn it publicly. And we used a couple verses from the scripture about how that in the New Testament in Acts, they burned their occult books and those kinds of things. And so the parents and the kids came back the next day and they burned about $11,000 worth of material. And that's kind of what got us started on this thing.
It's grown or burned from there,
burned
whatever way you want to say.
Yeah.
Now, when you say offensive, you mean the lyrics, or do you mean the rhythm itself?
No, we're not concerned about the beat. We raise 4, we call our seminars awareness seminars, and we try to ask 4 questions and ask young people to become better selective listeners. We raise the question about the lyrics of the music, what's it singing about. We're not on the beat, we're not hung up on the beat, it's the lyrics of the music. And we're finding a lot of them, John, are talking about all kinds of sexual perversion and illegal drugs, rebellion against authority, rebellion against their parents, and we raise some questions about the lyrical content. Another one is the lifestyles of the musicians. Some of them, like the book just came out by David Bowie's wife, talking about his many bisexual encounters, his homosexual encounters with Mick Jagger and many other people. How about the lifestyles of them? We know young people are looking for role models. The third question we raise is the intentions of the musicians. Are they doing it to be funny, or are they really preaching a new lifestyle?
Or just to make money?
Just to make money. But we're finding a lot of them are up front. The fact that they're preaching their own distorted lifestyle, their own distorted gospel.
Could you give an example of that? Who might be doing that, and what would they be saying?
Like a group that's not doing as much now, but the Village People, a disco group. They were formed by a guy named Jack Morelli. And we have this in our documentation, and according to a Newsweek magazine interview, in 1979, he said he formed the group as a protest against Anita Bryant. He went on to say he was trying to produce songs to make gay people more acceptable, and that's where he's coming from. Bowie said he was using this whole thing about bisexuality to sell records, but he said it's the way he's lived ever since he was very young.
Now, can you pinpoint a direct connection, and I don't contest what you're saying there, can you pinpoint a direct connection between what they're saying on the records and their lifestyle with the decline of behavior in certain age groups?
A direct connection. Well, it seems like young people, by the sheer mass of it, are just really immersed in rock music. It's not something you just kind of sit back and listen to. You're totally immersed in the whole setting of rock.
Do they live the lyrics, though?
Do the rock stars live the lyrics?
Well, no. Do the listeners live, or do they
Well, we find a lot
emulate
of young
the
people
performers?
begin to challenge, even as a rock star will tell the kid to challenge his parental authority, try all kinds of different things. The group KISS, they said that their largest group of fans were between the ages of 8 and 10 years old. And so how can that 8 to 10-year-old know what's being preached at them as an alternate lifestyle and what's just being pushed at them as hype to sell a record? We think for a lot of kids, it really helps to distort their value system.
Speaking of KISS, wasn't there some young fan of theirs tried to burn lighter fluid or something the way Gene Simmons
Yeah, I think
did?
he was trying to spit lighter fluid. And of course,
Was he killed?
I don't really know what happened to him.
I know he's burned badly.
I know there's a couple others that have tried to follow Ozzy Osbourne, you know, and try biting different things. And as he bit the head off a bat here a while ago and had to go through rabies shots, that kind of stuff.
Doesn't seem too bright, does it?
No. In fact, one guy, what was it, in Pink Floyd, the drummer for Pink Floyd a few years ago, it was the New York Dolls. He passed out from too much alcohol, and his girlfriend tried to revive him by pouring hot coffee down his throat, and he died of the burns in his throat, scalding hot coffee. So, interesting life.
Now, when you say rock, most of the groups are this way, or are there some really good kind of middle-of-the-road
We've
groups?
never published a black list of bad ones and a white list of good ones. We tell young people, you've got to decide. No one's going to jam it down your throat, but give us a chance to tell you the other side once, and then you decide for yourself.
Okay. Now, of course, there's some obvious messages in the lyrics themselves or in the lifestyle, as you say, of the rock performers themselves. But you have found sometimes what's called double masking takes place, where you will hear something forward and there's actually a message coming back. In fact, some lady wrote me about that a few weeks ago. I hadn't heard the term before. But maybe we're going to give an example right now. And you have that on a cassette?
Yeah, we have a tape now out on backward masking. There's been an awful lot of interest. Maybe you've heard of Phil Wyman, who's a California assemblyman, and they've started hearings in the month of October about backward masking. He feels that there should be some kind of a warning label on records that have backward masking.
Now, what we're going to hear now is what? Forward, the first
we are
time.
going to hear a cut off, I believe we're going to listen to Electric Light Orchestra.
Okay,
And
well, let's
bass
listen to
music.
that forward right now and see what we, or listen to what we hear. That's forward?
That's forward. It obviously makes no sense.
Was that a big seller? Anybody want to dance? Well, okay.
ELO is considered a very mild group, has really a tremendous, tremendously loyal
yeah,
audience.
in fact, I've heard many of theirs that certainly didn't sound like that. But let's hear that same thing backwards.
Yeah, same thing
okay,
backwards.
well, here's the ELO is now the OLE. Okay.
The music is reversible, but time. Turn back.
What was he saying?
He says, the music is reversible, but time is not. Turn back, turn back, turn back.
Now, does that frequently happen on rock records where there is some message somewhere in there, either subliminal forward or something backward?
Well, we found about 25, 30 cuts so far. Now, I got to tell you up front, John, we're much more concerned about what's being played forward than what's being played backward.
Think so, yeah.
Now, there's some of the groups that are obviously putting stuff on there backwards. They make only sense backwards. The controversy lies with groups like Queen and Styx, Rolling Stones. They have songs that make sense both forward and backwards. And the controversy lies, are they actually writing songs that make sense forward, that have a double meaning backward, and can it affect you?
Okay. But what you're saying basically is not only are some of the lyrics very obscene, very suggestive, very sexually oriented, very drug oriented, but the people are more or less trying to sell a lifestyle, either for money or for what they think is fun, or that they're actually motivated satanically, or what?
Well, we find some of the groups, like Black Sabbath, they say that black magic and sorcery are not gimmicks, but are legitimate interest to the band. Groups even like Blue Oyster Cult say they're not a rock band, but they're a cult. There's a lot of the groups that are really into that lifestyle. So it's, for some of them it's hype, for some of them they're living it.
Okay, well, Reverend Peters, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk with Father Charlie Apple, who's an Episcopalian priest here in this area, and he actually is a DJ, and he plays rock music, so we'll see what he thinks. We'll be right back and talk further. This Wednesday on Pittsburgh Today, talking about the, well, possibly destructive forces of rock and roll music. If you just joined us, we talked with Reverend Dan Peters of St. Paul, Minnesota. He and his 3 brothers, very active in a campaign to make the public, the parents and the young people, aware of just the message and the lifestyle of rock performers. Now joining us is Father Charlie Apple, who is of WKPA in New Kensington, also affiliated with St. Edmund's Academy. And let's give Father Apple a nice warm welcome. Now, one thing I guess we should clear up, WKPA is what type of station, Father?
It's pretty much middle of the road during the week, with a little bit of emphasis on light rock and roll. The sister station, Y104, is pretty much a rock and roll station, modern rock and roll. And on Saturdays, we're pretty much oldies, 50s and 60s rock and roll.
Interesting, a father would say the sister station. That's
yes.
pretty good. Anyway,
that's too much.
I mean, it's unlikely that any type of person of the cloth would be even affiliated with rock music on the air. That's permitted by your superiors.
Well, yeah, I was a disc jockey long before I was ordained.
Okay.
And Bishop Appleyard, who's the diocesan in Pittsburgh, really didn't see any conflict involved, in as much as my ministry is pretty strongly oriented towards youth, and I've used rock music for years and years in teaching situations and in conferences to help get a point across various points.
Now, some of the same groups Reverend Peters was mentioning, or
yeah, several of the groups that he's mentioned in some of the literature I saw. Some of the things I've used in positive ways, that is, used them in order to illustrate a positive point. In other cases, use them in order to give the kids something to bat up against, in order to learn what might be wrong with what's being said.
Could you briefly tell us something positive and then maybe make a comment on what Reverend Peters says about the destructive force?
Okay. Yeah, I would say, for example, if we're talking about racial relations, particularly several years ago, I don't think it would be quite as pertinent today, but songs like Ebony and Ivory by McCartney and Wonder, Black and White by Three Dog Night, and a variety of other songs, I think were very useful in helping to open up the discussions about the black-white relationships. One of the most powerful records in my life was one that I know most of the church people in my time did not like, and that was the record Eve of Destruction by Barry McGuire. Somebody just smiled out in the audience. I think probably had the same experience. And I've told my kids in school the impact that record had on my life, because it opened my awareness to, number one, what was going on in the Vietnam War, what was going on in this country and race relations, and generally the kinds of values that we had allowed to creep into our system that I felt, after being involved with that music and relating to it and batting up against it, I felt very strongly we were going down the wrong path.
Okay,
and that was a rock song that was considered at that time to be horrendous.
Okay, he was shaking his head too. Maybe before we get on to your comment about his, maybe your comments about what he just said.
Well, I appreciate some of the rock stars. We don't condemn every song out there on the market. We just try to make young people aware of some of the negative things that are coming at you. Barry McGuire, I've gotten a chance to know him a little bit personally, and I'm real thrilled of his, experience of accepting Christ as his Savior in just the last few years. In fact, he has a movie out on rock music now and its harmful effects, and he said all music is spiritual and it's going to minister to you. He said it's just a question of what that music is going to minister. And I guess that's really where our concern is.
In the same way with Bob Dylan. I mean, he's changed quite a bit.
Oh, Dylan has really reversed. And Dylan was on the cutting edge of rock music for years. You and I are about the same age, and Dylan was challenging the issues all the time, in society. And there's a place for musicians to do some of that.
Yeah, what I'm concerned about is I think it's important to understand that challenging attitude is not necessarily in and of itself harmful. I think that's probably a an important aspect of an adolescent developing in a democratic culture.
Well, you see, when you've got a group like KISS who programs to the 8 to 10-year-old, I've got a problem when they're singing about sweet pain and using their whips and all that kind of stuff. I've got a problem with introducing an 8 to 10-year-old to some of that in the interest of freedom of artistic expression.
I would suggest that any parent that would take his 8-year-old to a rock concert isn't exercising parental control.
I think so too, but you know, somebody's buying those albums for those kids when they're only 8 to 10.
The adults.
And some of the parents are the ones that have got to be retrained.
Okay, yeah, I will go along with that without any question, and I think probably if there's anything wrong with what's going on in this country with kids today, it's not rock and roll, it's the fact that too many people have failed to exercise their parental prerogatives in dealing with their children.
There was a study done in Michigan recently that the average father spends less than 2 minutes a week teaching values to his 5th grader, and yet the average kid in that same age group listens to 6 hours of top 40 type radio a day. It's a question of who's teaching that kid values.
I have no problem with that.
So you're saying
but what I'm saying is an adult should have the choice if he wishes to listen to rock music that says those things. He should have the right to do so and not be made to feel that he is a bad person because he's listening to it.
Talking about an adult listening to it.
An adult listening to it.
Yeah.
So the idea of banning it or passing, as soon as you get into legislation about backwards masking, for example, I actually listened to that and I understand backward masking fairly well, and I found, was there something offensive in that particular one?
No, it's just kind of tongue-in-cheek, really.
Okay, why didn't you play one that was particularly offensive?
This was the station selection.
Oh, okay. The station selected that.
Not mine, by the way.
Okay.
I didn't like it either way.
Yeah, actually, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. ELO does much better things than that.
We're much more concerned about the things that are coming off on the front end, though, rather than trying to find some witch in the background, you know.
How about, why are we really getting down to the way things are now? And you're saying parents should exercise, of course, caution and supervision and everything, and that's one of the problems with our country right now. But why are the parents and the kids so inundated with all this stuff? I mean, when you look at Reverend Peters' documentation here, some of the lyrics, some of the quotes in Rolling Stone about what some of the performers say.
Okay,
I mean,
first of all,
it can only be harmful.
I noticed one of the documentations that was used was that a lot of the documentation comes from People magazine and Rolling Stone. I really don't consider them to be tremendously accurate journalistically.
But they're, of course, widely read.
They're widely read, but I think there is a certain amount of hype that they themselves exercise
Well, we know
over
that
the performers.
we know that the stars are doing some hype.
Yeah.
We think Rolling Stone is one of the more credible sources. They wrote on us, and they read the article back to us. Their lawyer called and read the article back. Anytime we quoted anybody else, they checked with that artist.
They're cautious. They're cautious, but they're prone to hype also. They will allow the rock performers to give. But let's face it. If I would tell a bunch of kids that there are dirty lyrics on a record that they haven't heard yet, they're all going to run out and buy it. 13-year-old kids like dirty music. For example,
not if they're properly supervised. Well, there's a tendency.
Come on, John.
Huh?
When you were 13, you went out behind the back room and said dirty words too. You know you did.
But you see, the Bible.
I was very deprived. There was no back room.
For example, there was a song out in 1962 called Louie Louie by the Kingsmen.
Okay.
All right, the original version was done in 1957 by Richard Berry and the Pharaohs. It was a calypso rock song. The lyrics were very bizarre because it was a calypso song. It was something about smelling the roses in her hair, and she was on the ship, and also there was nothing dirty about it at all, but it was unusual. When the Kingsmen sang it, they garbled it. They sang the lyrics, but very unintelligibly. I used to go to bar mitzvah parties and graduation parties and get requests for that record all the time, and the kids would come up and say, "Did you hear what he said?" Well, I knew what he said, and it wasn't dirty at all, but they were, there was a certain real thrill in hearing what they thought were dirty lyrics.
How about if it is really dirty?
If
like,
it's really dirty?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think it can be, you can teach through that particular process.
But most disc jockeys don't choose to teach. They merely play what kids want to hear. The largest station in the metropolitan Twin City area in Minnesota, which we have a population of about 2 million, the only thing that determines what they're going to play is what the young people want to hear. And talking to the disc jockeys that have even tried to say, no, we won't play that, the management has said, you either play that or you lose your job. And so I have a problem that we just push at them whatever really they want to hear. Nobody issues any moral, exhibits any moral restraint.
I was talking with a couple of the fellows at Y104 last night because I only found out I was coming on here last night, which meant I had no time for any research at all. And they indicated to me that they've noticed a tremendous shift in the past couple of years to songs that are much more in line with traditional morality. Fidelitous relationships, long-term relationships. They used as example particularly Longer by Dan Fogelberg, which is emphasizing a much more, an arrangement, a living arrangement, which is much more permanent, contrary to what we were hearing in the 60s and 70s. And their feeling was that this was coming about as a result of the fact that people wanted to hear this more, and as a consequence, the companies were producing it.
Boy, there's a lot of the groups that are really making big time. There's a group out of Minneapolis called Prince. Rolling Stone magazine critiqued their album Dirty Mind, and 2 of the songs on it. One is about making love with your own sister, talking about the virtues of incest. The other one is where Prince stops a woman on her way to be married to somebody else in her wedding dress and entices her into engaging in oral sex with him. Now, that's getting a lot of play on our FM station.
I wouldn't deny that that is probably inappropriate for kids at a certain age.
How about Olivia Newton-John and her physical song? Even she admitted that she's dealing with sexual intercourse. I took you to an intimate restaurant, then to a suggestive movie. She says there's nothing left to talk about unless it's horizontally. Let's get physical, I want to get animal.
That is, well, I wanted that once in a while myself.
Got to pray for you, brother.
Well, we can all ruminate about that as we're sitting upright rather than horizontally. And take
I hope so.
Take a 2-minute break and come back. I want to remind you the phone number here, 333-9363, in case you have a comment or a question for Reverend Dan Peters or Father Charlie Apple. Be right back. About the relative merits or demerits of rock music with Father Charlie Apple and the Reverend Dan Peters from St. Paul, Minnesota. Let's take a quick question. Do you have one? Would you stand up, please?
Hi. Does this only happen in rock and roll, or does it happen in country and jazz and other types of music?
We talk some about country in our seminars too, but young people in Minnesota anyway are really much into rock, and that's why we started talking about rock, because our church young people were into rock. But even we've got some quotes by Conway Twitty, who said in an interview in a magazine a couple of years ago, as a country artist, I'm not proud of a lot of things in my field. He said, there's no doubt in my mind we are contributing to the moral decline in America. The thing that bothers us is, why do each of these artists have to accentuate the negative and tear down morals, tear down family standards? Why can't we have more of them singing the positive things, the good, the pure, the healthy?
No, thank you very much. I understand Earth, Wind, and Fire. In fact, I was talking with Patrice before, and she's familiar with their music, said that they actually get together and pray before, and that they have some messages in their rock concerts that are very religiously oriented.
Earth, Wind, and Fire has just changed in the last couple of years. They've come to know Christ as their Savior, and there's been a real change in the group Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Oh, are they still as popular?
I can't really tell you. I don't know exactly where they are on the chart.
Do you have a question too? Just stand up.
I'd like to know, do you think the Beatles were a lot of the part of starting this, or expressing a lot of these bad points about rock music?
We read a sociologist lately, and he said the #1 contribution of the Beatles to Western civilization is they legitimatize the use of illegal and hallucinogenic type drugs. That was the thing that they were really given credit for in Western civilization. When John Lennon was asked about his drug experiences, he said, you know, their tours were just drenched in drugs, and there was sometimes they'd go for months at a time without ever getting fully sober. And he said the whole clean-cut image of the Beatles in their early years was one pushed on them by the media because they wanted in on the free drugs and all the groupies.
Yeah, I have a comment on that, though. I think you will find that throughout the history of people who are in the arts and various certain kinds of cultural pursuits have a tendency to live lifestyles like that. Edgar Allan Poe was an alcoholic, a drug addict, and probably suffered from severe mental illness. That isn't going to stop me from studying his short stories and finding a tremendous amount of symbolism and a tremendous amount of literary worth. The chances are that many of the Greek philosophers were practicing pederasts. That doesn't mean that what they wrote, therefore, is bad. Michelangelo may well have been homosexual. That doesn't cancel out the art that he did. I think that there's a tendency to simply identify someone because of his lifestyle and assume that everything he does sells that lifestyle. The Beatles, for example, did a number of songs that I considered to be pretty impressive in the ability to communicate ideas.
It's funny though that the Bible says, by their fruits you're going to know them, and the Bible also says, he that walks with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools will be destroyed.
Okay, if I were working with my son or my daughter, and I wanted to use the Bible, there are a couple of things I'd never let them read in the Bible either. The Lord said,
you shouldn't be reading them yourself then, Father.
I will bring your enemies back from Bashan. I will bring them back from the depths of the ocean so that you may wade in their blood and your dogs may lap up as much as they want. Without understanding about the cultural background of that statement, kids would have a hard time dealing with it. The most fortunate woman is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. She took a 10-peg in one hand, a workman's hammer in the other. She struck Sisera and crushed his skull. She pierced him through the head. He sank to his knees, fell down, and lay still at her feet. At her feet, he sank to his knees and fell. He fell to the ground dead. And then there's St. Paul's command that I certainly won't let my children read until they understand something about the cultural background. Why nature itself teaches you that long hair on a man is a disgrace. I don't want them reading that particular line unless they understand why.
They may read it at someone else's
What do you do
home.
then with the scripture when it says to bring up a child in the way they should go? Show them the positive. Show them the positive lifestyle. And when they're old, they won't depart from it. I don't really think it's necessary for the 6, 7, 8, 10, 11-year-old to show them all the negative and say, now, somehow we want you to sort all this through.
Lord, no, I wouldn't want to show them all the negative. Absolutely not. But when I was growing up, and let's say I was about 11, 12 years old when I started collecting rock and roll records, okay? I became, at the age of about 14, fascinated with drinking songs. The rhythm and blues songs of the late 50s, the late 40s, early 50s. The emphasis was on alcohol, drinking any kind of alcohol you could get. Gin, 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 juice, juice, juice. I got loaded. I must have 1,000 records that are alcoholic-oriented. My family background taught me to be able to understand and appreciate some of the humor in them and what was being said.
Of course, some families don't.
Right, but that, again, shouldn't take away my right to have enjoyed that music when I was a kid. I don't drink. We have no alcohol in our house. I drink on occasion when I'm out in public at a party. That's it.
There's no room. Your house is full with records.
That's right.
Okay.
Whoa. The point is, it is.
Yeah.
The point is, the records themselves did not destroy my morals. And I'm not a particularly strong person. I mean, I'm a sinner just like the rest of them.
Getting back to what Reverend Peters says about their fruits, you'll still know them. Certainly, don't you agree that the lifestyle of some of the rock stars does rub off on the kids?
Rub off on the kids? I think there's a certain amount of emulation.
They try to emulate them. Yeah.
There are a number of football players who take drugs. There are a number of baseball players who are alcoholics and have not been recovered from it. And I wouldn't want my kids following them either, but I'm not going to forbid them from going to a baseball or football game.
Okay, well, let's take a quick call. On line 1, you're on Pittsburgh Today. Line 1, thanks for waiting. Go right ahead.
Yes,
Father Apple is looking up. He thinks it's from heaven. No, would you please just speak right up?
Well, she might be a woman.
Okay, go right ahead.
all right, thank you. I am calling to say that I have heard about the related records and everything, and I was wondering, is Elvis Presley's music any relation to this?
Go right ahead. Don't listen to your television set.
No, I think she asked the question.
Elvis Presley's...
In other words, is his music detrimental to youth when we were kids?
Well, you must be something of an ESP, a mind reader, too. I didn't get that out of that.
Well, of course, Elvis, we know where his lifestyle ultimately took him and how depressed he was in his drugs trying to fill some of the emptiness in his own life. He actually was raised in a pretty decent home, in a churchman's home. So Elvis, of course, is really credited with doing a lot to popularize rock and roll as being the music of young people.
Okay. On line 3, you're on Pittsburgh Today. Line 3.
Hello?
Go right ahead on line 3.
Hello?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, my question is, I've heard controversy about about Christian rock groups. And I'd like to know, does backward masking go on in Christian rock groups? Because some of them, they can really jam, you know? And also, I'd also like to know if they think that the devil can have part in that. Not the bands, but the devil could put that in.
Well, we do believe that the devil is the prince of the power of the air, and so we believe that some of this perhaps could be at his own choosing that it ends up there, because we did read a man from the University of Chicago lately saying that backward masking, in order to put something on a record that makes sense forward and backward, is a tremendously difficult task. It's not something
costly.
that's easy and very costly. And so we have heard there are some Christian contemporary groups out there that have they've played their stuff backwards and have said positive things. That's the thing
that's
that
interesting, though, because then you're subliminally influencing people against their will with your message, which may indeed be offensive to a Hindu who might buy the record.
That's why we think all records should carry a rating, and even gospel ones, and it's in the upper right-hand corner, caution. This album includes lyrical content which could be construed to promote the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Caution, according to what I heard on a recent Christian television broadcast, don't go to the movie E.T., it's satanically inspired. I remember when I was a kid in the 40s, people telling me that Making Whoopee was a bad song because it encouraged people to sexual licentiousness. I grew up hearing that song. I remember Perry Como singing a song in the 1956 era, "You're more than life to me, more than eternity." That could very easily be construed as a hook against God.
Well, Charlie, going back to the 40s, though, why was there so little less drugs, promiscuity? What are some of the causes?
Well, I think that there's a lot of complicated factors involved in there, one of which is the tremendous presence of the automobile in our culture in the late 50s and early 60s, and the ability of kids to break away from their families at an early age and do what they wanted with very little parental control. And I think my kids aren't going to drive till they're 40.
Can't really, I'm not old enough to speak to 40s music, but songs like Ted Nugent singing Wango Tango, talking about oral sex, or Alice Cooper singing about making love with a dead body. Obviously, we've got some things that are a little perhaps...
That is not making whoopee.
That's no. Yeah. There's no question that there are... I would never deny that there are not parts of rock and roll that are bad. But I think that the literature I saw from you is very much card stacking. You have listed all the negatives and have not given the kids the ability to choose the positive aspects. For example,
no, because you do a fine job of that. See, you as a disc jockey always give them the positive side. We need an opportunity just for 90 minutes to give them the other side just for once.
Here's a quote. You feel that Jesus Christ Superstar is blasphemy because Jesus is alive, not dead, like he's portrayed in the opera. Jesus Christ Superstar was a passion play. All passion plays were done on Good Friday. They ended with the crucifixion. They did not end with the resurrection.
I can't speak to this. Some of this is what the press has written about, as we have not...
You don't agree with that?
I don't really believe that the Jesus Christ Superstar is really that bad. I'm really not that totally concerned about
music.
Jesus Christ.
It's rock music.
I'm not condemning something because it's a beat, you know.
Right,
really
it's
the message.
All right. What about some of the people that started
The Bible
it?
does say, though, that you've got the trumpet has to sound a certain sound, and so sometimes things can be good and not really the best. Maybe sometimes the Bible says in Philippians 4:8, the things that are good, are pure, are holy, are virtuous, those are the things that young people and all of us are to really think about, not the things that are maybe okay and, you know.
One of the problems with growing up, though, if you only confront the things that are good, what happens when you get out of the home and you suddenly are confronting things that are not good, and you have never been steeled against that? I think one of the things that helped me...
You'll have to ask God about that, because he says, bring up the child in the way they should go, don't tell them the way they shouldn't go.
You can help them deal with the way they should go.
Aren't you, as a preacher, tired of parents always giving all their kids all these lists of don'ts? I want to give my kid a list of do's. Do this positive thing. Do that positive thing.
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot of rock records that tell them to do certain positive things.
I'll give you a couple of quick do's.
Yeah.
We're going to get our question.
When I'm speaking in reference to rock and roll, I'm not talking about Christian rock. I'm talking about the Roy rock. Usually are concerning upsetting a person emotionally, but don't you think spiritually, don't you think because we're spiritually being driven down, that that's just as important as being upset emotionally?
Oh, I
or maybe
think so
even
too.
more than emotionally. Because spiritually is what's going to count in the end, not emotionally.
We're convinced that, you know, we're a three-part person. Even Jimi Hendrix said music is a spiritual thing all of its own. He said you can hypnotize people with music, and when you get them to the weakest point, you can preach into the subconscious the things you want to say. We believe that music is spiritual and it's going to minister to people. The question is, how is it going to minister?
But you both, at least for a bottom line, agree that parents should exercise supervision, be very selective. Some is good, some is bad.
Absolutely, and when they hear a song on the radio that they find is offensive to them, explain to their children why they feel it's offensive and talk about the implications.
But the average parent, both mom and dad are out working, and so they don't have that opportunity, so I think parents should take a much better, greater control.
Then I think we better take most of the books off the shelf, too, because not all the parents are always around to help censor the books. You can get into a situation where you become the ultimate authority because you happen to believe something.
Boy, to my 6-year-old girl, I am going to be the ultimate authority.
And I'm certainly glad.
Once she gets to be 18,
you have the right to be the ultimate
change.
authority to your 6-year-old. You don't have the right to be the ultimate authority to my 6-year-old.
This will be continued on the guiding light in the next hour. Anyway, we want to thank you, Father Charlie Apples. Good to see you, Reverend.
Can I give him my address?
I'm going to give it to him right now. In fact, that's what they pay me for, and believe me, I want to earn my pay. Okay, just right. It's very simple address to the Peters Brothers. You see it up on your screen there, Box 2222, and that's St. Paul, Minnesota 55109. And
you can give them my address too, if you'd like.
St. Edmund's Academy.
St. Edmund's Academy, 5705 Darlington Road, Pittsburgh 15217, and I'll be glad to have all comers on the mail.
Sure.
Okay.
We'll send on the materials list if they like.
Okay, good. You will do that.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. In fact, it'd be interesting, I think, to talk for hours and then maybe go out and have dinner, play some records. Anyway, we're going to take a break. Yeah. Patrice will be back with Lucille Tregonowan with some winter car care tips. Be right back.